The night was colder than usual for early autumn in rural Tennessee. A lonely diner sat off Highway 68, its neon sign flickering weakly. Lori's Diner, open 24 hours. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried onions lingered in the air. The only sound was the steady hum of an old refrigerator and the clinking of a waitress stacking plates behind the counter. At 2:17 a.m., the doorbell chimed. A young woman stepped in, her face half hidden beneath a hooded sweatshirt. She looked exhausted, eyes red, hands trembling. In her arms, wrapped in a thin floral blanket, was a newborn baby. She hesitated by the door, glancing around the empty room. The waitress, Linda, barely noticed her at first. "Sweetheart, we're closing soon," Linda said gently, wiping her hands on her apron. But the young woman didn't respond. She moved toward a booth in the corner, her eyes darting nervously toward the window. She sat for only a minute, long enough to whisper something soft to the baby. Then, with a shaky breath, she placed the infant on the seat, beside a folded note, and turned to leave. Linda heard the door swing open, the bell ringing once more, followed by the sound of a car speeding away into the dark. At first, she didn't realize what had happened, but then she heard it, the faint cry of a baby. Linda rushed to the booth, her heart pounding. There, under the dim light, lay a tiny baby girl, her face flushed and eyes barely open. The note beside her was stained with tears. "Her name is Clara. Please keep her safe." "I can't." Linda's hands shook as she picked up the child. She looked out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the car's taillights, but the road was empty. The world outside seemed to stand still. Only the baby's soft cries filled the silence. Moments later, Linda was on the phone with the sheriff's office. Within minutes, 2 deputies arrived, followed by a social worker. As they carefully took the baby, Linda felt a deep ache, as if a part of her heart was being carried away too. No one ever saw the woman again. 6 months later, baby Clara was officially adopted by a couple from Knoxville, John and Margaret Reynolds. They were kind, modest people who had tried for years to have children. The day they brought Clara home, Margaret whispered, "You were meant for us." Under their care, Clara grew into a bright, curious child. She loved drawing, reading bedtime stories, and sitting by the window during thunderstorms. Yet, even in the comfort of a loving home, something inside her always felt incomplete. When she turned 10, Margaret told her the truth, that she'd been found as a baby at a roadside diner. Clara didn't cry. She just stared at her reflection in the window, whispering, "Why did she leave me?" That question became the quiet echo of her life. Years passed. Clara went to college, moved to New York, and built a career in interior design. To others, she seemed happy, independent, even radiant. But at night, she often dreamed of that diner she had never seen. The sound of a bell above the door, the flickering neon light, the feeling of someone walking away. And then, one random Saturday, everything changed. While cleaning out old boxes from her parents' attic during a visit home, Clara found a small tin container labeled "Baby Things." Inside were a hospital bracelet, a clipping from the local newspaper about the diner baby, and at the very bottom, an old, faded receipt from Lori's Diner, dated the night she was found. The handwriting was messy, but 2 words stood out clearly. Table 4, coffee, pancakes, and beneath it, a name that made her heart race. But then something unexpected happened. Clara sat on the floor, holding the old receipt in her trembling hands. The paper was yellowed, its edges curled from decades of being tucked away. She squinted, tracing the faded ink with her thumb. The name written beneath the order read L. Daniels. She whispered it aloud, as if saying it might awaken something. L. Daniels. Who were you? Her mother, Margaret, peeked into the attic doorway. "You okay, sweetheart? You've been up here for hours." Clara hesitated. "Mom, do you know this name? L. Daniels. It's on the receipt from the diner, the night I was found." Margaret frowned, thinking, "Honey, I don't remember anyone ever mentioning that name. Maybe the waitress who found you?" But the answer didn't satisfy Clara. She could feel the invisible thread of her past tugging at her, pulling her toward the truth. That night, back in her apartment in Brooklyn, she couldn't sleep. She searched the name online, scrolling through pages of nothing. Restaurants, obituaries, old directories. Then, buried in a scanned local newspaper from 1993, she saw it. Lori Daniels, owner of Lori's Diner, Highway 68, Meigs County. Her pulse quickened. Lori's Diner, the same name from the receipt, the same place she had been found. By morning, Clara had already booked a flight to Tennessee. The plane touched down in Nashville, and from there she drove through endless stretches of rural roads, past fields of yellowing corn and half-abandoned gas stations. It felt surreal, like driving through a forgotten chapter of someone else's life. When she finally reached the diner's location, her heart sank. The building was boarded up, its sign barely legible beneath years of dirt and rust. Lori's Diner had long been closed. She parked the car and stepped out, brushing her fingers across the peeling paint on the door. The air smelled faintly of old oil and rain-soaked asphalt. She peered through a crack in the window and imagined it. The booth in the corner, the faint light, the sound of the doorbell. It was strange, standing in the place where her life had truly begun, and where someone else's had shattered. A voice startled her. "You lost, miss?" Clara turned to see an older man leaning against a pickup truck, a brown dog resting by his boots. He wore a faded cap and had eyes sharp with curiosity. "I'm not exactly lost," she replied. "I'm looking for someone." "Do you know what happened to the woman who used to own this place? Lori Daniels." The man nodded slowly. "Sure do. Lori was my sister." Clara's breath caught. "Your sister?" He nodded again, the expression on his face softening as he studied her. "She passed about 15 years ago. Cancer." Clara's shoulders sank, a mix of sadness and confusion washing over her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up something painful. It's just, I was found here, as a baby. I think Lori might have been the one who found me." The man's eyes widened slightly. "Wait a minute. You're that baby? The one the sheriff wrote about? My sister talked about you sometimes. Said she never forgot the night she heard a cry coming from that booth." He stared off toward the diner, lost in memory. "She always said the young woman who left you seemed scared, like she wanted to say goodbye but couldn't." Clara swallowed hard. "Did she ever mention anything else, a name, a car, anything?" The man thought for a long moment, then snapped his fingers. "You know, she did mention something odd once. Said the woman paid for her coffee and pancakes but left in a hurry when a dark car pulled into the lot. She looked terrified." That detail struck Clara like lightning. A dark car. A woman running. A receipt left behind. Something deep inside told her this wasn't just about abandonment. It was about escape. That night, Clara sat in a small motel room nearby, staring at the receipt again under the yellow glow of a lamp. The words seemed to whisper back at her. Table 4, coffee, pancakes. L. Daniels. Who had her mother been running from, and why had she chosen this diner on that night? Clara knew one thing for certain. She couldn't leave Tennessee. Not yet. Because somewhere in this quiet, forgotten town, her story wasn't finished. If this story already has you wondering who Clara's mother was and why she left her that night, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what she discovers next will change everything she thought she knew about her past. The next morning, Clara woke up before dawn. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled deeper into a story that had waited 30 years to be told. She decided to start where everything began. The local archives. The Meigs County Library stood on the corner of a sleepy main street, its windows fogged with age and the smell of dust and old paper hanging in the air. Behind the counter sat a kind-faced woman with gray curls and bright blue eyes. Her name tag read, Ruth. "Hi," Clara began, showing her the receipt. "I'm looking for any records connected to Lori's Diner, from around 1993, or maybe any news about a woman who disappeared that year." Ruth adjusted her glasses and looked closely at the paper. "You know, that place used to be quite popular back then. Lori was a friend of mine. Let's see what we can find." They spent hours digging through microfilm reels and yellowed newspapers. Headlines flashed by. Local fair opens this weekend. Storm floods Highway 68. And then one that made Ruth pause. She pointed at the screen. Young woman missing after leaving hospital. Meigs County, September 1993. The article described a 19-year-old named Emily Carter, who had given birth at a small clinic outside town and vanished 2 days later. Her car was later found abandoned near Laurie's diner. Clara's throat tightened. Emily Carter, she whispered. The name felt heavy, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Ruth nodded solemnly. I remember that case. Folks said she ran away, but her mama always claimed someone was chasing her. A chill ran down Clara's spine. Chasing her? Ruth leaned closer. There were rumors. Emily's boyfriend back then was older, trouble with the law. People said he didn't want her to have the baby. Clara's mind began to spin. Was she that baby? Had her mother been running from someone dangerous that night? Ruth handed her a copy of the article. You might want to talk to Sheriff Burns. He's retired now, but he worked that case. By afternoon, Clara was knocking on the door of a modest brick house at the edge of town. The man who opened it was tall, gray-haired, and carrying a mug of coffee. His voice was rough but kind. You must be the diner baby, he said, before she even introduced herself. Laurie used to bring your story up every Christmas. Clara smiled faintly. I think I might have been that baby. I'm trying to find out who my mother was. He motioned for her to come in. The walls were lined with old photographs and newspaper clippings, a lifetime of memories frozen in time. I remember the night like it was yesterday, he said, settling into his chair. It was storming hard. Laurie called in, said a young woman dropped off a baby and took off. By the time we got there, she was gone. The only thing we found outside was a car, no plates, doors unlocked, and a man's jacket in the back seat. A man's jacket? Clara echoed. Yeah, the sheriff nodded. Brown leather. We never figured out who it belonged to, but there were initials stitched inside. R.J. Clara's heartbeat quickened. She scribbled the initials into her notebook. Do you think it belonged to the boyfriend? The one Emily Carter was seeing? Could be, the sheriff said. Name was Ray Johnson. Real bad news. Arrested a year later for assault. But no one ever proved he had anything to do with Emily's disappearance. The name felt like a shadow in her mind. A piece of darkness from someone else's tragedy, now woven into her own. Sheriff, Clara asked softly, do you think Emily could have survived? The old man looked at her for a long time before answering. Some people said they saw her after that. In Knoxville. Maybe in Chattanooga. But nobody knew for sure. What I do know is, she loved that baby. She'd been planning to name her Clara. The words hit her like a wave. Her name wasn't just something written on a note. It was chosen. By someone who loved her enough to let her go. That night, back at her motel, Clara spread out everything she had. The receipt, the article, her notes. She drew a line connecting all the names. Laurie Daniels, Emily Carter, Ray Johnson. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was her mother's last cry for help. And she wasn't going to stop until she knew why Emily Carter had disappeared, and whether she was still out there. But then something unexpected happened. The rain poured hard that night, streaking down the motel window as Clara stared out into the darkness. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, still knew the truth. The next morning, she drove to the edge of town, following the address Ruth had quietly slipped into her hand before she left the library. It was written in careful cursive. Carter Farm, Route 12. Emily's mother still lives there. The drive was quiet, surrounded by endless green fields turning gold in the sun. Finally, she reached a small farmhouse with peeling paint and a rocking chair creaking softly on the porch. Sitting there was an elderly woman in a faded blue dress, her white hair pulled back neatly. Clara stepped out of the car, her heart pounding. Mrs. Carter? The woman looked up, squinting. Yes? Can I help you? My name is Clara Reynolds, she began, voice trembling. I think I might be your granddaughter. For a moment, time froze. The woman's expression didn't change. She just stared, as if afraid to hope. Then she slowly stood, gripping the railing. Come closer, child. When Clara did, the woman reached out and touched her cheek. You have her eyes, she whispered. Emily's eyes. Tears welled in both their eyes, The woman invited her inside. The living room was filled with photos, faded family portraits, a smiling young girl, and one picture that made Clara stop. It was Emily, unmistakably. Brown hair tied in a ponytail, soft eyes that mirrored her own. She was holding a bouquet of wildflowers and smiling at the camera. That was taken 2 months before she disappeared, Mrs. Carter said softly. She told me she was pregnant. She was scared, but she wanted to keep the baby. Ray didn't. He got violent. She came home one night with a bruise on her arm and said she was leaving him for good. Clara swallowed hard. Did she ever say where she would go? She said she'd go somewhere no one would think to look. Somewhere safe. A week later, the police found her car by Laurie's diner. Mrs. Carter's voice broke. They told me she was gone, but I never believed it. I always thought maybe she left the baby somewhere safe. That one day, that child might come back. Clara took her hand, tears spilling freely now. She did. I'm here. The old woman smiled through her tears. Oh, Emily, you did it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was full of love and ghosts. Before Clara left, Mrs. Carter handed her a small box. I kept this all these years, she said. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished but intact. Inside the locket was a tiny photo of Emily and a baby wrapped in a floral blanket. Clara gasped. That's the same blanket I was found in. She must have left this photo behind by accident, Mrs. Carter murmured. I never understood why until now. That night, Clara sat in her rental car near the diner ruins, clutching the locket. She felt as though she could almost see her mother's reflection in the cracked window, a young woman trembling, desperate, but brave enough to make the hardest choice. But as she was about to drive away, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ruth, the librarian. Clara, I found something else. You'll want to see this old police report. It says Emily Carter was spotted in Chattanooga 3 weeks after she disappeared. Clara's breath caught. Her mother might have survived. The next morning, she drove south to Chattanooga, her heart racing faster with every mile. The address Ruth had sent led her to an old records office downtown. There, an officer confirmed what Ruth had found. A woman matching Emily Carter's description had checked into a women's shelter under a false name. Marie Daniels. Daniels. The same last name on the receipt. Everything came crashing together. Laurie Daniels hadn't just found her that night. She had helped Emily escape. Emily must have used Laurie's last name to hide her trail. The truth hit Clara so hard she had to sit down. Her mother hadn't abandoned her out of shame or fear of motherhood. She had left her to save her. She whispered through tears, "You were running from him. And Laurie, she helped you disappear." Her mother hadn't been lost. She had been protected. As Clara left the records office, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. She looked down at the locket in her hand and smiled through tears. She wasn't just the diner baby anymore. She was the daughter of a woman who had fought for her life and given her the chance to live freely. But then, just when Clara thought she had uncovered everything, she received a letter that would change everything she believed about her mother's fate. The letter arrived 2 days later. It was inside a thin envelope, yellowed with age and postmarked from a small town outside Atlanta. The return name made her heart stop. E. Carter. Clara sat on the edge of the motel bed, hands trembling as she opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, written in delicate handwriting that leaned slightly to the right. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then you found the path I prayed you would. I never meant to leave you, my love. I was scared. Not of being your mother, but of losing you to someone who would hurt us both. Laurie helped me that night. She promised to take care of you until it was safe for me to come back. But I never made it that far. I left a piece of myself in that diner, and I've carried you in my heart every day since. I built a small life here, quiet and hidden. I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping that one day you'd find me. If you can forgive me, come to me. Love always, Mom. Emily. The world seemed to tilt. Clara pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by sobs that came from a place so deep she hadn't known it existed. For years she had believed she'd been abandoned, but in truth she had been protected. Without hesitation, she packed her bag and drove straight to Georgia. The address led her to a small house surrounded by pine trees. The air smelled of rain and soil. For a moment, she couldn't move, afraid of what she might find. Then the door opened. A woman stood there, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with time, but unmistakable. Those same gentle eyes, full of warmth and apology. Neither of them spoke. Clara stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mom?" Emily covered her mouth, choking on a sob. "My baby." "Clara." They met halfway, collapsing into each other's arms. 30 years of silence shattered in a single embrace. "I thought you were gone," Clara whispered. "I never stopped looking for you," Emily said through tears. "But they told me you'd been taken far away. I didn't want to ruin your life. I just wanted you to be safe." They held each other for a long time, both shaking, both healing. When they finally sat down, Emily showed her an old photo album, her life in hiding. Pages filled with snapshots of quiet days, small smiles, and empty spaces where Clara should have been. "I worked at a bookstore under a different name," Emily said softly. "I kept thinking maybe one day you'd walk through the door. Every time the bell rang, I hoped it was you." Clara smiled through tears. "Funny. I used to dream of that sound too. A bell over a door. The same sound that had echoed in Laurie's diner all those years ago. That evening, they walked together outside, the golden light of sunset bathing everything in warmth. The pain was still there, but it had changed. No longer sharp, just tender, like a scar that had finally stopped bleeding. "I used to hate not knowing where I came from," Clara said quietly. "But now I think I was always meant to find you this way." Emily took her hand. "And I was always meant to let you go so you could come back stronger." They stood there in silence, watching the horizon. Later, Clara visited Laurie's old diner one last time. The building was still broken and silent, but the air felt peaceful now. She placed a single wildflower on the step, the same kind from her mother's old photo, and whispered, "Thank you, Laurie, for saving us both." As she turned to leave, the wind brushed through her hair, carrying the faint echo of a doorbell's chime. It felt like goodbye, but also, finally home. Sometimes love means walking away, not because you stop caring, but because you want someone to live free of the shadows that once haunted you. And sometimes, the past we fear most is the one that leads us home. If Clara's journey touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that love always finds its way, no matter how many years pass. What would you have done if you found that old receipt? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below.